Welcome back everybody to part 4 of our Unity Balloon Rider tutorial series. In the last video, we set up the first of 2 hazards, our spikes, and a cool collision checker so we can detect what hazard we're colliding with. Today, we're going to create the second of those hazards, our killer fish. If you've just joined us in this video, please feel free to download this project and follow along at home. And when everyone's ready, let's crack on. First, let's look at how we want the fish to work. If you go to the main camera, you will see we have a killer fish object. We don't actually need this circle collider, so go ahead and remove it like so. Open the killer fish parent object and you will see we have a fish sprite. And if we zoom in for a closer look, you can see that we have a small circle collider within its mouth, which is a trigger. That's what we want the player to collide with. The fish game object is also tagged as fish, so make sure you have the appropriate tags like so. And we also have 2 transforms, a max position and a minimum position. These 2 transforms are the positions the fish will move between depending on the range the player is from the fish. So, for example, if the player is within range of the fish will move to the maximum position and raise his head out the water to catch the player. When the player is at a safe distance away from the fish, then he will return to that minimum position like so. These positions worked well for me in testing, but you can go ahead and change them however you like to best suit your project. And lastly, the reason the fish and the 2 transforms are child objects of a parent killer fish is because the parent object will constantly be moving and following the player's position at all times. Plus, when we attach the fish controller script to this killer fish parent object, we're going to want to reference the fish sprite and the transforms and allow them to function individually to the parent game object. So go ahead and open up the fish controller script. For the variables, we're going to need a few things like we just discussed. The first 2 being a move speed, so a public float of speed, and a public float range, which will be the distance the player is from the fish. We also want the fish to follow the player, so we'll make a public transform that we'll simply call the player target, the target to follow. We also want that sprite to move between the 2 transforms, the min and max position. So that will be a public game object, the big fish, and of course the 2 positions we want to move between. Public game object, min position, and max position. Now, let's start putting this together in the update, starting with the player target follow. We are only concerned with the player's position along the x-axis. Where the player goes on x, so too does the fish. In order to do that, we'll punch in a vector2 called new position, new pos for short, and that will equal a new vector2 in the brackets player target.position.x. And as we're not concerned with the y-axis, we can simply leave that as transform.position.y. Then underneath is how we're going to move to this new position by punching in transform.position for this object will equal a vector2.lerp. Then inside the brackets here, the current transform.position of the fish, we want to go to the new position above, and we'll do that by speed multiplied by times.delta time for a nice smooth movement that will update every frame. And that is all we need in order to move and follow the player's position along the x-axis. But what about when the player's in range and we want the fish to leap out and attack? For that, underneath, we'll use an if statement. And what we will do is we will measure the distance along a vector2 between the player target position and the position of the fish game object. So in the brackets there, you can see we have a vector2.distance. We then want the reference for the 2 objects we want to measure the distance between. That, of course, the player target.position and the transform.position of the fish. If it is less than or equal to our range, then we want to leap out and attack. But before it does, it first wants to make sure that the player is alive. So for that, we'll create a new if statement, and we want to access the player controller script from the player target. Therefore, the player target dot get component player controller dot is dead equals false. So if the player is alive, then it knows to leap and attack. And we'll do that by moving to that max position. And that's done by simply stating that we want the big fish.transform.position, so that big fish game object, which will be our sprite, will equal vector3.move towards, inside the brackets, the points we want to move between, so the big fish.transform.position towards the max position.transform.position by our speed multiplied by time.delta time. So when the player is in range and the player is alive, then the fish will raise his head out the water, move to that max position and attack the player. However, what goes up must come down. So when the player is out of range, we want the fish to return underneath the water. And to do that, we'll just say underneath this if statement, else the big fish.transform.position, and once again, the same as above, the vector3.move towards big fish.transform.position to our min position.transform.position, speed times time.delta time. So there we go. When he's out of range, he goes back submerged under the water, ready to strike again. Now, our fish is pretty smart and he understands that he doesn't always have to work for his dinner. He knows when the player hits a hazard like a spike, dinner comes to him. So he doesn't have to leap out the water, he could stay submerged, ready and waiting. So what I'd like for us to do underneath is let's use this same line of code here, but we'll state that if the player target, and this time we're going to get the capsule collider 2D from the player. So the player target.get component capsule collider 2D dot enabled is false. So if we hit a hazard, then he can just stay submerged under the water, or if he's leapt, can return back. So we'll just apply that same line of code in there like so. Okay, let's hit save and set this up in the editor. Let's now attach the fish controller script to the killer fish parent object, and let's fill in our variables. So let's start with the player. So the player is our player target. The big fish is our fish sprite, our game object, min position, and our max position. And let's give this a range of 4. I think this should be quite good. And a speed of 3. With those set, hit play and test it out. Now, when we leap and get close to the water, we should be in range, and there he is. He leaps out and tries to attack us. Let's go in again, test it out. There we go. So when we're far, he goes back. When we're close, he attacks. But you'll notice nothing's happening when we collide with him. That's because we need to go back into our player controller script and add the collision with the fish into our collision checker. So let's head into our player controller script and we'll come right back. In the collision check, we don't want anything fancy. We just simply want to say if the collider.tag equals fish, then call the standard player def function and nothing else. So there we have 2 different behaviors depending on what game object we collide with. This is a really handy way to enable an object to collide with different things and have a different response each time. So let's save and let's give it one final playtest. And now when we make collision with the fish, we should see the def animation play and it looks like we're being dragged under. Good. Let's double check when we collide with a spike. So when we collide, we no longer have a collider, so he remains in the water like so. Fantastic. And let's stop there for this video. Play around with some of the values. Maybe you want your fish to be really fast. Maybe you want to increase or decrease the range. Get creative, have fun, and tailor this to however you like. Thank you all very much for watching. I hope you're enjoying this series. And as always, any questions, please let me know in the comments, either here or on our socials at Twitter or Instagram. And I will see you in the next video. Take care.